Meanwhile, the U.S. is putting more pressure, at least more than ever, on China to keep North Korea in check. The vice president just today saying he wants China to do more. Here to discuss, former State Department official David Tafari, along with former New York State Homeland Security Director Michael Balboni and retired Lieutenant Colonel Tony Dean. Colonel Dean, let me start with you. We've gone into the saber-rattling phase of this where we've been before, but never, I don't think never in the most recent years have we gone into it with, after launching a series of Tomahawk missiles at one particular theater and then dropping the mother of all bombs on another. Does this give us more strength? Does this give the current administration more strength to push through some results?
Well, I think that diplomacy works best with the threat of military action to follow it up. And for years, we've just kicked the can down the road. I think the Trump administration has said that, we've reached a point now where it's time to act. But, in acting, it really is making China understand that we're serious about doing something and getting them to not just kick the can down the road.
Michael, everyone talks, everyone who's an expert in this area continues to bring up China. And yet it's North Korea that, to Colonel McShane's point, that seems to be pushing the envelope here. Perhaps North Korea can't be reeled in. Maybe, perhaps Kim Jong-un is just too erratic of a person to be reeled in by anyone.
So what we're seeing is a shift from the engagement and negotiation to deterrence and containment. And that is really difficult when you have a regime like North Korea where it is incredibly opaque. We don't have the kind of intelligence coming out of North Korea that we would normally have in these types of situations. And that's because they have been developing this over time, and they've basically broken up every promise that they've ever made. The real actor here, of course, is China, and the question becomes, what is China's strategic national interest? Obviously, they're involved in the South China Sea. They want to expand there. So could they be using North Korea as kind of a bargaining chip or a stalking horse? But this is a very dangerous game right now because of the opaque nature of the military capability of North Korea.
David, considering President Trump tweeting out that one of the reasons apparently he didn't call China a currency manipulator is that they have been of some assistance thus far with North Korea. And this does feel like maybe they do have a lot more leverage in a lot of areas now because no one wants to have a real true military conflict with North Korea.
There's no doubt that China has a lot of leverage over North Korea. Its closest friend. North Korea depends a lot on China for its economy, for sale of coal and other resources. It does a lot of trade with China. The question is, how willing is China to use that leverage? China is not known to be a leader in the international community in getting countries to back down. It's not known to be a leader in nuclear non-proliferation. So this is a real test of Chinese leadership. It's also a test of the U.S.-China relationship and whether President Trump has been able to convince China to help us out with this situation. And what is President Trump going to do in return for China? You mentioned, the currency situation, also trade. Is President Trump willing to be willing to compromise with China on trade issues in order to get China to help us resolve this situation? This is a real nail-biter right now.
Colonel, it's China, maybe the wild card here is North Korea having a nuclear bomb that works. It's one thing to say they've never gotten involved with nuclear proliferation halfway around the world, but when their next-door neighbor, a potential loose cannon, has that ability, doesn't that put extra pressure on them to act as well?
Well, you would hope it would, but, what you were saying earlier about the opaque societies, is North Korea really just saber-rattling to get more international attention, more international funds? Are they really serious about this? So, China may have a little bit better idea of the motives, which, again, goes back to our putting pressure on them, saying that, we're not going to kick this can down the road. We're going to solve it now. So I think, I don't think it's real brinksmanship, but I think that we really need to look at, what's in China's interest and what's in the neighbors around their's interest, because North Korea is certainly frightening all of its neighbors.
Michael, what would it take? I know in the past that North Korea has done this before. They were paid off. I'm not sure to what degree or what it all amounted to, but what do you think it would take? Is there a monetary number that we can put on appeasing North Korea and perhaps putting this away for another year or so? Because it'll never truly go away, I don't think.
Well, so here's what we know doesn't work, the sanctions that we put out there so far. The North Korean society, one thing we do know is that they are very used to incredible hardships. They've had hundreds of thousands of people over the years die of starvation. This is a country that is not going to buckle to these types of threats. At the same time, if China were to truly stop their trade or reduce it, that would be a dramatic impact on this society. But then the question becomes, if you get them to that stage where they're so desperate, would then they take reckless military action? The question becomes, what types of incentives can we put in? But here's the other thing. What type of incentives would South Korea let happen? Remember, they're the neighbors. They're on the peninsula. They're very important strategic allies of ours. So the question is, what would they want to see in terms of an ultimate deal?
Although, you know, South Korea has prospered. It's a wealthy nation now, and we've provided a lot of cover for them. So maybe helping out on the financial side of this might be in everyone's best interest. Guys, I want to shift gears a little bit, though, to the Pentagon reportedly prepping for a cyber attack on the U.S. electric grid. This, of course, amid threats from North Korea and Iran. Michael Balboni, you're the cybersecurity expert. How serious of a threat is this? And give us sort of the worst-case scenario.
Yeah. So there are two things that you should keep in mind when you discuss this. The first thing is that everybody goes back to the Sony attack, the hack that happened there, and they attribute it to North Korea. It's very difficult to have true attribution that you know exactly where a threat came from. So that can be as much of a red herring as anything else. But in terms of the vulnerability of the electrical grid, unfortunately, in many places in the United States, is antiquated. It has not been able to get up to the speed it needs to in terms of being cyber secure. And cybersecurity is never really a destination. It continues to, the goalposts continue to move. But recently, we've been exploring and seeing that the Internet of Things, that is, that you make a smart car, a smart refrigerator, a smart light bulb, these all become things that can be manipulated to also affect an attack. So we're in a very dynamic threat situation when it comes to cyber, not just from state actors also.
Right. And David, I guess one of the arguments here, particularly as we get the you know, the expansion of Internet of Things, and our refrigerator talks to the grocery store, and it talks to our bank account, and it creates all of this vulnerability, it's who pays for it, right? Because this is what we see with corporate America right now. They acknowledge cybersecurity issues, but they think government should pay for it. Government, of course, thinks the corporate world should pay for it. And as a consequence, we're all too vulnerable.
Well, the bottom line is we're all paying for it as well. You know, North Korea is going to look for our greatest vulnerabilities. So we would do well to encourage the private sector and spend government money to shore up our cybersecurity and prepare for an attack from North Korea. They will certainly look to attack us, as will some of our other enemies, like Iran. If they find vulnerabilities, they're going to exploit them. North Korea really needs to find a way to hurt our interests in order to deter us from acting in North Korea. We have to prepare on all fronts for that.
Colonel, I got to tell you, I've lost a fortune trying to bet on the upgrade of the electric grid. We hear about it. It feels like hype. I know it's there. I know it's 100 years old, and I know it's vulnerable. But, again, I don't see any real urgency of actually addressing the issue.
Well, agreed. I don't really see the urgency. You know, the president said that he was going to get on cybersecurity. But I think it's a jump to say that North Korea is going to attack our infrastructure. Right? It's one thing to do demonstrations. It's another thing to say that they're actually going to launch an attack. And, yes, they attacked the Sony, but, you know, is that really an attack on America, or was that an attack on the movie, a Seth Rogen movie? So it's kind of hard to say.
All right. Well, one thing I think we're all starting to understand, though, is that the clock is ticking and the noose is tightening, and there's some serious tension. Something is going to have to come out of this, perhaps in the next couple of weeks. Gentlemen, thank you all for your expertise.